What does King Charles' Easter walkabout tell us about his recovery? Will a new movie scupper Prince Andrew's comeback hopes, and how Queen Camilla went from one of the most unpopular women in Britain to keeping the royal show on the road? This is the only place you need to come for all the biggest royal news and views. Welcome to Palace Confidential. I'm Jo Elvin, and here to discuss the latest royal news is the Daily Mail's editor-at-large Richard Kay and columnist Sarah Vine. Welcome to you both.
Hello.
Rebecca and Richard having holidays. Some people
That's just rude, isn't
Some people
it?
just don't work hard enough. We're the serious ones. We're the best ones. A reminder to like, and if you don't already, please do subscribe to the Daily Mail's Royal channel. That way you will never miss an update from your favourite royal shows. Now, moving on, over the weekend, King Charles surprised many by not only attending the Easter service at Windsor, but also doing a walkabout to meet the many well-wishers who had gathered. Richard, this walkabout was quite unexpected, wasn't it?
Well, it was unexpected because we were told that he was having to keep a distance from the public. He was sort of in self-imposed isolation because of his medical treatment. So it was, not only was it a great thing to see, but it also was a demonstration that clearly the medical treatment is working and that his physicians were comfortable enough for him to be not only meeting members of the public, but shaking their hands.
Yeah, it's incredible. Sarah, do you think the intention here was to reassure the public that he is recovering well?
Yeah, it seems obviously he's well enough to come into contact with germs, which is all we need to know, and that's a good sign, I think.
I thought you were going to say well enough to come into contact with journalists. It's like, that takes some extra.
Yeah. We are the germs, but
many have said it.
He's not taking that kind of a risk.
No, exactly. But you've been covering the royal beat for a couple of years, Richard, a couple. In the context of that, how popular is King Charles now in terms of history? Is it the most popular he's ever been?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, it quite possibly is. He could well be at peak popularity. There's nothing like a bit of frailty and vulnerability to encourage the populace to remember what our royal family are for and why we love them. I mean, I think one has to step back a moment and look at what Charles has had to deal with in the short time he's been on the throne. A lot's been thrown at him, but he's come out of it pretty well. But this health blow is the biggest blow of all. But what he clearly demonstrates is that not only is his personal resilience, but his determination to sort of get back and doing what he feels is his number one duty, which is being at the public face of the monarchy.
Indeed. Sarah, it's interesting for me. I remember as a child really getting the sense that Prince Charles was quite stiff, a little bit awkward, particularly at public events. But do you think that maybe this situation has made him appreciate that side of his role more? He just seems so much more relaxed.
He does seem very relaxed. I think there's a combination of factors. I think Queen Camilla is much more relaxed in her role, and that makes him more relaxed. Let's not forget that he is very influenced by her. She is his sort of piece, as in PEACE. She makes him happy. And she's obviously doing very well. And I think it must give him huge pleasure to see her kind of stepping into the breach in such a brilliant way, which she has been doing, and in such a kind of easy way. And I think she has been on an incredible journey. The last 20 years, she's gone from being the mistress to the Queen, and she's rehabilitated herself in a really kind of quite sort of energetic and consistent way, and she's earned the love and respect of the British people. She still has her critics, but by and large, I think people really like her. And I think he has sort of, in a way, done the same. And I think where they are now is it's sad that he's ill, and it's a shame. But I think, ironically, they're probably in the best place they've been in terms of their standing with the British public.
Do you think some commentators were discussing that he wasn't even wearing gloves to shake hands? Is that something that's noteworthy?
Well, not really. He doesn't, as a rule, wear gloves.
That's what I thought,
unless it's cold. I mean, the female members of the royal family, the Queen most famously, and Princess Anne was another, were the glove wearers. And Charles doesn't. I mean, he's quite happy to shake hands when he meets people.
Now, do you think, Richard, that this means, this visit, this rather relaxed, very public-facing visit means that we're going to see more, not less, of the king.
Well,
We're heading into royal peak season, the anniversary of D-Day, 80th anniversary.
Yeah, big social season as well, Trooping the Colour, and all the events associated around that in June, Royal Ascot, the Epsom Derby. These are the events where one would expect to see the king on display. Whether he's going to be able to or yet we don't know. I mean, it's all clearly going to depend on his treatment. But I suspect he'll want to be there. I'm sure he'll want to be on the Normandy beaches. I remember going back a long time now, 40 years ago, when, as Prince of Wales, he parachuted with a whole load of old paras and modern paras onto the beaches. So that was in 1984. And he's been back on every significant anniversary since, so I'm certain he'll want to be there.
Yes, I don't think he'll be parachuting on this occasion. Well, I hope not.
Well, I mean, the Queen did do it for the Olympic ceremony.
That's true.
And she was
There's
much
a
older.
standard to hold up to there.
Yeah. Paging Daniel Craig.
Well, King Charles certainly did seem to enjoy meeting the public again. Do look out for more of our favourite pictures from his walkabouts over the years a little later in the programme. Now, tomorrow sees the release of a new film, Scoop. Boy, have I been waiting for this one. It's all about Prince Andrew's notorious and inarguably disastrous TV interview about his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. Sarah, coming to you. This question's making me laugh. Is this going to scupper any hopes that Prince Andrew may have had of making a comeback as a working royal?
I think Prince Andrew has scuppered any. I mean, I don't think that he is his own worst enemy. I mean, there's two of these films in the making. Sorry, there's one that's been made, and then there's another one I think being made about the same story, which is the story of how this interview came about and how it happened. It was a disastrous interview. I have to say, personally, I have no desire to rewatch it because I found it so cringeworthy when it aired the first time. It was impossible to watch.
I know, but Billy Piper is so watchable in everything. I just can't wait.
No, I know. I think the reason that Andrew has sort of, in a way, kind of got sort of emerged at the front of things is just purely because he's filling a vacuum. And I think as soon as the King is back on full pelt and Prince William is back, I think Andrew will be pushed back.
I mean, Richard, obviously, it really has been a trying time for the royal family on many fronts. Do you think they should find a role for him and give him something to fill that void?
I feel they should do something. When he's too young to be pensioned off. He's, what is he, 60, 63, 64. He could be found a role, but I agree. I think there's no prospect of him resuming public
Andrew Pierce
duties.
says he should be put to run. He's put in charge of doing the tours of Balmoral that they've just announced.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest.
Well, I mean,
not Balmoral. Is it Balmoral? Yes, it is Balmoral.
Sandringham,
Yes, yeah.
Windsor Castle.
Yes, he should be in charge of put him in charge of the royal households and just get him to run those.
I can't see Andrew loving hanging out with the general public
No,
day
he loves
in, day
bossing
out.
people around.
Right.
He loves driving around in big cars. That's he could just do that.
Well, might I suggest something else where he wouldn't be quite so forward and front-facing? What about putting him in charge of one of the royal estates, or making him a ranger of Windsor Great Park? He lives in Windsor Great Park.
I think we discussed that before at one point, didn't we? Yeah.
And that would give him some sort of meaningful job. I mean, a lot of people talked post the interview about him doing the famous Tory minister who
Profumo.
A lot of people talked about him doing Profumo, going off to work in charity to rehabilitate himself.
Yeah.
That just won't.
Well, this is what we
happen
said yesterday on this. We were talking about this on the reaction, and I think that's what he should do. He should just knuckle down and rehabilitate himself. But he can't ask for that to happen. He has to. It's got to be show, not tell. Don't you think?
Camilla's played the long game.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a long game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if anyone is going to sort of step forward of that what are they, quartet, it should really be Princess Anne, because everybody adores her. She never puts a foot wrong. She looks fabulous. She is fabulous. She's the one. If anyone needs to fill a void.
Yeah, but
Pudgy Andrew?
But do you get the sense that the King is relying on him a bit more in certain circumstances?
I don't know. I don't think. I think the King is just. You know, he's just his annoying little brother who just will not stop pushing himself to the front of the queue.
Blood's thicker than water. There is a unique bond between Charles and his siblings. Andrew was the heir to the heir for very many years. And, you know, Charles has kind of looked out for him all the time. Probably not as well as he should have done. But I remember a long time ago, when Andrew decided to give up being in the Navy, you know, Charles was sort of casting around and trying to suggest ideas to his mother, to the late Queen, what he could do, and actually suggested at one stage that Andrew come and work with him and sort of be attached to his staff. Had he done that all those years ago, one wonders whether we might have had a different Duke of York than the one we have today.
But that wasn't exciting for him.
There is a parallel, isn't there, with Prince William and Prince Harry? You know, this sort of kind of slightly useless, annoying younger brother who just gets it all wrong the whole time, and then the elder, the grown-up.
The parallels are frightening.
Yeah.
You know, both went into the armed forces.
Yeah.
The heirs who were jealous of the spares.
Is this just the destiny of the spare?
It kind of is.
Yeah.
Well, it just feels like a sort of generational curse, doesn't it, really?
Okay, well, good luck with that, Princess Charlotte. But what do you think, Richard, the future holds for Andrew and Sarah?
Well, look, they've been divorced now far longer than they've actually been married, but they seem to rub along quite well.
Oh, don't say rub along, please.
Okay, get along.
Upset me.
They get along quite well together. They share a house. If they do live in separate quarters, but you know, there's a lot of speculation that they might remarry, and everyone was positing this idea that once Prince Philip, who was Sarah's avowed enemy, had passed, there would be no impediment to a remarriage, but there's no sign of one. There's no sign of them marrying anyone else either.
Yeah.
I think they'll just carry on together, shuffling on.
Shuffling along. Do you have any sympathy for Prince Andrew, Sarah?
I do, in a way. I think that he's very much a product of his upbringing and of his time, and I think that he is, you know, he's a sort of fairly spoilt, entitled oaf in the same way that Harry is. And I think that, you know, with people like that, there's only so much you can expect of them, to be perfectly honest. So, I mean, I think a lot of his, you know, he doesn't really understand why everyone's so cross with him about the Jeffery Epstein. I mean, that was going back to the interview, going back to the film Scoop, that was what was so patently obvious from the interview, and why it was so awful, was it was clear that he genuinely didn't think he'd done anything wrong.
And he genuinely thought that interview was a smash hit.
And he had no self-knowledge at all. He didn't realise how he came across. And I sort of think, you know, it's a bit like a Labrador. You know, at the end of the day, it eats too much and it farts, and there's not really much you can do about it.
On that image, I'm going to turn now to some of your thoughts from our last week's show. First, here's a couple for you. Maria says, Prince William and Princess Catherine have grace and dignity in spite of everything that's going on in their lives. Our love, prayers and admirations go out to them, their families and their supporters. Wishes from Toronto, Canada. Hi to everyone in Canada. We love that you watch. Prayers for the royal family, says Laurie. My goodness, this news is heartbreaking. Harry and Meghan should be ashamed of themselves. While another viewer writes, when Princess Catherine let the world know about her diagnosis, I cried. I am an American and she touched me with her courage and kindness. Anyone who wasn't moved had no heart. I heard about the conspiracy theories and I thought it was rubbish, and I thought she would tell us all in her own time. Now everything makes sense. And lastly, Chantel writes, Queen Camilla is really being strong and comforting to the love of her life, King Charles. She's there for Prince William. She's so kind in her words about Prince Catherine, and she's being strong for her country and the people. She truly is the Queen. Well, let's bring back my panel now. Last week, the Mail's royal editor, Rebecca English, wrote a new piece about how Queen Camilla has gone from one of the most unpopular women in Britain to keeping that royal show on the road. Sarah, I think for anybody who wasn't around then, it really is difficult to fathom now just how unpopular she was.
Yes, I mean, she really, really was, and particularly after the death of Princess Diana, which saw the most extraordinary outpouring of national grief. I mean, it really was. It was very, very forceful and strong, and a lot of people felt that, you know, she was, you know, in some way responsible for the sort of way everything had gone so horribly wrong. And she was considered, you know, she was very much seen as the other woman. And also I think there was an element of Princess Diana just being this sort of rather fragile, young, sort of blonde, and her being this quite sort of kind of roughy-tufty sort of country woman. They were just very, very different characters, and so there was a slight Disneyfication of Princess Diana and a slight sort of, you know, wicked stepmother-y thing going on with her. I mean, I remember having dinner with Prince Charles and Queen Camilla shortly after they had shortly after they got married. And then I had dinner with them again a couple of years ago, and they have changed so completely, and their relationship has become so much more cemented, and she has become so much more she really is a very sort of nice person. I don't have to explain it. She's just a very warm, kind, and you know, when I met them all those years ago, I could immediately understand why he was in love with her, because she is fun, funny, a little bit naughty, very self-deprecating, kind of relaxed, easy to talk to. I remember talking to her, you know, about the fact that, you know, she loved going home to her house because she could sort of be herself and see her kids and that kind of stuff. And she hasn't lost any of that. And I think what's happened is that the public have started to see a bit of that, which was always quite private and really probably just between her and a few, and well, just the Prince. And so that started to sort of transpire. And the more people see of her, she's one of those people, the more you see of her, the more you like her, because she's actually a very nice person.
When I look back at those times, I think Charles and Diana were, in hindsight, possibly one of the worst ads ever for a generational gap of a marriage. If you remember seeing, you know, Diana dancing wildly to Duran Duran at Wembley while Charles was just standing there next to her, they weren't equal.
No, they weren't, and they weren't really very matched. I don't think they were terribly well matched emotionally or intellectually. I think they had very different upbringings, very different outlooks. Charles is extremely well read, quite sort of literary, quite interested in sort of complicated things, like, you know, very, you know, he's quite a deep thinker, and Diana had many talents, and she was one incredibly compassionate and kind, and obviously really good with people, but I don't think she was a deep thinker, and I don't imagine they had an awful lot to talk about. Whereas I think probably Camilla, you know, having had a few conversations with her, she can talk about anything. She's very well read. She's obsessed with books, as we know. She does her book podcast.
Yeah.
But Richard probably knows.
What a shame he didn't marry her in the first place.
That's what I always
I mean, that's the tragedy of the whole story.
He wasn't allowed. Yeah.
No, he wasn't. I mean, and you know, he made a nuts of his marriage, and it remains a spectre that haunts him to this day. I'm certain of it.
But what about the rest of the royal family, who do seem to be warmer to Camilla now than
it wasn't always like that. I can tell you for an absolute fact. I mean, she was not welcome within the royal family when she was playing Mrs. Parker Bowles. She was seen as someone who had threatened the stability of the monarchy, and Princess Anne and Charles's siblings took their lead from their mother, the Queen, and the Queen did not welcome Camilla in for many, many years. It took a long time before she was seen as an acceptable house guest. That's the way the royal family worked. Perhaps it should have happened sooner, but you've got to go back to those days and you remember how very popular the Princess of Wales was. And I hear what Sarah says, but I was very much front row at that time, writing on it and quite close to Diana. And, you know, she articulated what she felt was happening to her marriage, and she did blame Camilla and her husband for a lot of the unhappiness she felt, and she came up with some very memorable phrases in that Panorama interview.
Absolutely. Yeah, indeed.
No, I mean, I think Diana was, I mean, I completely understand. I mean, how else could she have possibly felt? But as Richard said, the problem was the inception. It was right at the start, which is that he should have been allowed to marry her. That was who he wanted to marry. Was it not the Queen Mother who put her foot down and said no?
Well, there are two things. I mean, it wasn't just the Queen Mother. I mean, Camilla didn't want to marry him. Let's be clear about that. She was madly in love with Andrew Parker Bowles, who was a dashing army officer, and she liked Charles. There's no doubt about it. But he was sort of a bit on the side, if you like, at that time. I mean, her ambition was to marry Parker Bowles, and she duly did. But yeah, I mean, there's this myth that the Queen Mother and Diana's grandmother sort of connived together to make them, Charles and Diana, come together and get married. But in fact, they were opposed to it. I mean, her own grandmother said, "You're not like them. The royal family are very different. You're going to find it hard to fit in." But you know, Diana's mind was made up.
Gosh,
and I think I'm I don't know, reading the Charles Spencer stuff a couple of weeks ago about his upbringing, and that awful, you know, his book that he's written about being abused at school, and but you read about his young years and with his sister Diana, and you realise that they were very damaged, those children. It must have been very difficult for her to sort of be catapulted into that life with no real sort of support, and with this other figure, you know, sort of just always looming in the background.
And so young.
Yeah.
So young. I mean, younger than our daughters now.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
But so do you think now the visibility of Camilla, she's stepped into the role and she's coping with all these other duties, with everybody knowing that the backdrop, her husband's ill with cancer. Do you think that has, it must be so difficult for her, but do you think that's helped with the rehabilitation as well?
Well, I think what's really helped with her rehabilitation is her being crowned queen. And, you know, let's go back to the coronation, and there was criticism about his decision to crown her queen, including from me. A lot of people, ordinary people, didn't feel it was quite right. And I wrote a piece saying, I'm not sure if it's quite right. I'm not sure that's what should be happening. But I think for him it was very important to sort of send that signal that she is his queen, and that, you know, he cannot do this without her. And I think that it does make a difference just having that status. Do you not think, Richard?
No, I agree, and it was quite a surprise that she was crowned queen. I'm certain that was always Charles's ambition, dating back from the moment that they married, and he was determined for it to happen. But I think it took a long time. It wasn't a matter of winning over the public, and she has by and large won over the public. She hasn't won them all over. No. She never will. But she's done a good job. I mean, the thing which strikes me about her is that she doesn't try and seek to take the limelight. She very much wants to be the support act. You can see on her public engagements, she is nervous still, and that's quite endearing quality. It shows a vulnerability, if you like. And she must wonder in her quieter moments how on earth it's come to this. You know, this is a woman who had one dress in her wardrobe and lived a life in the countryside with her dogs and her children, and she's ended up in this extraordinary position at such a late age too.
How do you think she bears the weight of the sense of duty?
I think it weighs heavily on her, but I think her sense of humour, and she has a sort of sense of proportion about that. I don't think she takes things too seriously, and she sees the funnier side in things, and I think that's a great relief valve for her, release valve, if you like. But I think she is aware of that, particularly now, because she's pretty much our number one royal in the absence of William.
It's so strange, isn't it, that you say it's come to this, and now she's the number one front-facing royal, at least temporarily. Do you think that she feels that sense of duty to Charles to step in for him? Well,
I think she'd do anything for him. I think that I do think that even though they're both sort of in their mid-70s, I do think theirs is a great love story. I really do think it is. I mean, if you think about of how Charles has had to fight for her. I mean, her coronation was part of his project to legitimise her in the eyes of not just the British public, but also his own family. But also, I think he's thinking ahead, and he's thinking, well, if I go, and he's been ill, and obviously we hope that he has a lovely long life, but if I go, where does that leave her?
That was going to be my next question. If he passes first, what does become of her role?
Well, I don't think she'll have a role. I mean, she will be a majesty. She will always remain Her Majesty, but she has no blood relative in the royal family at all. And I don't think she'll want a role, quite frankly. She will not, I don't think, become a Queen Mother type figure, because she has no relationship with William and Catherine, other than the fact that she's married to William's father.
And also, I think the other problem that Charles has perhaps been quite aware of is the fact that, of course, the boys still blame Camilla a lot for what happened with their mother, and that's understandable. That's a big trauma for them, and I don't think they will ever, I mean, I'm sure they will overcome it, but it's always going to be part of who they are. It's part of their emotional makeup, but particularly Harry, in America, we've seen in his book Spare and the accusations that he made against her. I think Charles is very conscious of the fact that he doesn't want to leave her, you know, if he does go before her, that he doesn't want to leave her in a vulnerable position. You know, it's very important to him that she is properly looked after. Yeah.
Gosh, it's such a complicated little tapestry, isn't it?
It's your blended family, you see.
Yeah. Can't choose your family. After King Charles and Queen Camilla's triumphant Easter walkabout, for this week's montage, we thought we'd take a look back at some of the royal couple's best moments meeting the public. Lovely images there. My thanks to Richard, Sarah, and to you, as always, for watching. We will see you next week on Palace Confidential. Bye-bye.